Hey everyone, Enrique here from Maven Analytics, and welcome to the finalist voting for the Maven Commuter Challenge. Today, we'll be looking at the 5 projects our community prize, and we'll be evaluating them by using the challenge objective, which was to create an interactive dashboard that illustrated post-pandemic recovery trends across the MTA services. Now, the challenge was a collaboration with Plotly, so it's exciting to see that 3 out of the 5 finalists created their visuals by using Plotly and Dash. Now, as always, we'll consider each project as a whole, including description, images, and embedded reports. So let's get started.
Wei Tan did his project in Plotly, which for me, having produced a Plotly course is always a little plus, but I promise I won't let that bias my judging. But I was really excited to see a handful of the Plotly projects come in, and Kaiwei's was definitely one of the most appealing. Really strong write-up. He drew inspiration from a similar visual produced by the New York Times. And if you ever want to look at some really amazing data viz, keep an eye on the New York Times because their team is absolutely fantastic. But certainly not a bad source to draw inspiration from. But he includes an image of that visual here and describes why he really liked this visual. Then just really nice information on kind of the logic behind his transformations, including details like, consistency, week start on Sunday, all of this stuff, because he's performing these weekly averages, these kind of rolling metrics. So understanding where weeks begin, et cetera, is important if you really want to dive into the metrics. But what I really like about his project is that it's one thing to show us a visualization, but it's another thing to tie specifically this project to real world events. We're looking at COVID recovery for transit in New York City. And there are some very important policy decisions that were made that led to that recovery, right? When the pandemic started, we were all forced to lock down. Only a handful of people were moving around. And as, we got things like vaccines or, we felt like the spread rate, depending on what the requirements were, more people and more people were slowly getting back into the subways, but this often coincided with policy changes either by the city, state, or country. And he hosts, and so we'll dive into that in a bit. The last little thing that I liked was that he listened to Empire State of Mind a lot during this, which is a song about New York City. And I was there recently, and that was the first song I listened to when I got into Manhattan. So I also had that affinity there. But let's go ahead and jump into his actual dashboard. And so as a whole, I say this a lot, and I tend to gravitate towards this type of dashboard, but less is often more. So there are certainly a number of ways this project could be approached, and there are some more complex visuals you'll see in this round of voting, and all these approaches are often valid. But I think he did a really good job of telling the story of New York City's recovery just with a single visual. And so this main view here is just starting on when things locked down, March 1st, see this initial sharp drop when the city locked down. And then we have each of the various transit methodologies as its own line here. We have the ability to drill down into individual services, but really quickly, we can see his use of these milestones, which he researched. So for example, city is reopening in 4 phases, and he actually has a little tooltip that explains a little bit more about that event. We can see vaccinations, city workers are returning to office, so we can see an explanation behind these bumps as opposed to just these general trends, which sort of explain some of those. Then we get a new Omicron case. This is a little bit of a fear. Things kind of clawed back. More people started working from home again. We see that decline. But overall, it really tells the story there. And then on individual lines, we can see the percentage of pre-pandemic average ridership. And if we drill into an individual mode of ridership, what he's doing here is he identified that weekday and weekend recovery patterns were different. I believe this is because people were working remotely, but still might need to venture into the city on the weekends to do things like grocery shop or just at some point get out of their house during the pandemic, regardless. So I think that's a really interesting story to tell as well, is the fact that weekend recovery was a little bit higher than weekday recovery, but we're able to drill down on that for each of these pieces here. So overall, I think this does a really good job of telling the story of the initial decline caused by COVID lockdowns, identifying key policy and other world events that either led to, bumps that saw people coming back into office, or perhaps when Omicron came out, a decline. But it's very easy to understand both, where we started, where we were at the bottom, and, where we are essentially today, which is for access ride and bridges and tunnels, we're a little bit above pre-pandemic levels, while most of the mass transit is still lagging behind. But, moving in that pre-pandemic direction slowly.
I really love the idea that he kind of broke this out into weekday and weekend when you kind of dig into those services. Overall, I think that, the trend is really interesting, but when you really specifically look at that, um, I just think it's really kind of interesting. And to your point, obviously, like people have different routines on the weekends versus the weekdays. And sometimes, people who are working from home just need to get out and move. But it is interesting to kind of see the recovery of both right next to each other. So that was a great addition to have here.
I was gonna say something similar. I wasn't initially sold on the whole breakdown, weekday breakdown, because a lot of people used extra objects like slicers or whatever to accomplish this. But I actually haven't even caught on with this, and this is very awesome because if you look at the unfiltered list, then you don't see that, right? It's only when you drill into individual services, and you don't have to go through that extra step of searching through the various slicers. So I quite like this one.
Yeah, he's pretty intentional about the story he was telling, and I think it really pays off for specifically this view here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with that intentional piece. I feel like this was a very intentional visualization. Just to be able to capture so much in a single clean visual is much harder to do than most people would expect, and it was accomplished here. Sorry, go ahead, Enrique.
I was just going to say the same exact thing, and especially because the intention, I do think it's literally tied back to the challenge prompt. The challenge prompt, which is just like show how the different services have recovered compared to pre-pandemic levels. Perfectly explained in the first visual, and even in that first text that he kind of adds as well, like two have recovered, the others haven't, and adding because the interactivity piece was a part of the prompt, and I think it does help because you'd think, why would I need to filter if I can see all the lines here? Like, but the fact that by filtering, by using the interactivity, you get the weekday breakdown, I think is a clever way of like actually having an intention behind selecting services and not just So that's my piece. I love this one.
Yeah, awesome job, Kaiwei.
All right, so I'm really excited to be sharing Michael's challenge entry today. One of the things that really stood out to me almost immediately was both the simplicity of his data visualization, which you will kind of see is similar to what we just saw with Kaiwei's, but also the amount of information that he was able to include in this project. So really quickly, just kind of looking at his about this section section, he did a really great job with kind of setting the scene with the overall goal and the reason he chose to display his information as he did. I thought it was really great to have this whole conversation about the report structure itself. And I really, in this second part here, I really liked his kind of inclusion of the thought process behind level of granularity. So he said that he kind of chose specifically to look at the week level as opposed to the month level. And said, even while the month level might have been a smoother kind of line to show, it also really decreased his storytelling potential. And so he chose specifically to look at it at the week level instead, which I thought was just a really great kind of additional context for us to have as we're looking at this project. And I think it was really particularly relevant here specifically because the entire objective of the challenge was to kind of show this story of ridership recovery post-pandemic, and doing it at that level really allowed him to kind of dig in more deeply to what he's seeing there. So kind of looking at the dashboard itself, you'll see that it is a little bit similar to Kaiwei's, but I think that he really accomplished exactly what he set out to do. So in this first section at the very top, he's using this kind of 100% stacked bar chart to show that the subway, bus, and New York City traffic, which is being defined here as the 7 bridges and the 2 tunnels that are managed by MTA, make up 93% of average daily ridership. And I think it's really important to kind of set that context up front because then from there on out, he only focuses on those 3 areas. So you'll see that he continues to use the same consistent colors for each subway, bus, and traffic, and everything else is grayed out, which in my mind makes a lot of sense since the other four modes of transportation only make up 7% combined. So it seems really important to focus on the ones that make up so much of the ridership. So I think that the other thing that Michael has done, and again, kind of similar to Wei, except for in a different way, he's used what he's calling info windows to show more information about what's going on in these different time periods. So you'll kind of see that there are these darker areas along this line chart. So when lockdown started, we see that really big decrease. We see improvements as reopening begins. You kind of start to see where New York City gets vaccinated. We're kind of continuing to see this rise. You've got the Omicron case peaks and a distinct decrease in ridership. So I really just think that like having that ability to see all this information, and even in the chunks of time, so it's not just this is when this thing started, but here is this whole period of time where this particular event was probably impacting ridership, was just incredible additional context for us to have here. The one thing I will say is that I think that the challenge prompt requested some kind of interactive design, and I don't see a ton of that here. There is some ability to have tooltips and sort of see a little bit more information. So maybe that's a piece of interactivity that you wouldn't otherwise have. But the other kind of cool thing that Michael did was build in this really great animation. So you kind of get to see as the user the changes in ridership over time. And I can kind of just play a little bit for us. So you'll kind of see as we're going through, lockdown is happening. So it's really just kind of giving us this awesome story along the way. And it really helps solidify exactly the story he's trying to tell. So it was a really great project. It really accomplishes his objective in a way that really clearly shows that ridership recovery, but it also does it in a way that almost anyone could interpret, which I thought was just such a smart thing to do here.
This one is amazing. Like I remember looking at it for a long time when I was browsing and like trying to find something to sort of just add as a constructive criticism, and struggled quite a bit. But then if I really wanted to nitpick, I was looking at the KPIs at the bottom and sort of noticed that they aren't in any kind of order. I love the fact that the big three are sort of isolated to the left, but then it would have been cool to sort the rest of these ascending. To Lauren's point, they are 7%, but like I think it would make this like just a hair closer to perfect. It is pretty close already, though.
I think the strongest piece for me is just the storytelling. I feel like it's typically hard to tell a story without a ton of slides, but this is able to do it using other techniques such as the highlighting, the animation, and it's really cleverly done.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because both Michael and Wei, have these research these events that contribute here, and I really like Michael's events as well. I feel like between the two, I probably get a really full story, but it's a little interesting to see some of the differences potentially. Like most of them overlap, but I like the way that the windows highlight these periods. Like if I were to say, one thing that if Wei wanted to take away from this would be, show these kind of periods that Michael did, because in some cases, with Omicron, it is almost like a single day drop. So it's very easy to put like a single line there. But in other cases, it's vaccinations are rolling out. So we see a more gradual increase, and that's where these windows are really effective. I do wonder, if anything, like because we're focused on these three channels, maybe we just make the other four pieces like a single line just to kind of reduce a little bit of clutter, since it is only 7%. Because I do find that, like the spikiness of the lines, particularly for like Long Island Rail and Metro North, when I'm honing in on bus and subway, can kind of be a bit distracting. So if you wanted to declutter that and just make an other line, I think that would be effective, since that's sort of what he's pitching us up at the top too. But overall, this is really great storytelling as well.
One other thing that I was kind of just like, I continued to be fascinated by was how much these lines really sort of matched each other, obviously, because these events are happening and they're affecting all of this traffic. But if you look at the very end, this is where New York implemented congestion pricing. And it's the first time where you see a very slight decrease in bridge and tunnel traffic. And you see this a little bit more of an increase both in bus and subway. So I just like, again, just kind of thinking about the events that he chose, I thought this was just a really like another fun one to include here. And it's the first big one where I was like, oh, these aren't matching. Why, these trends aren't matching. And I was able to see exactly why one went down while the other two went up.
So yeah, my analyst brain was definitely starting to get distracted from this call looking at that because that's been in the news a lot recently. And so I was just like very curious almost. I hope you keep this living and breathing because I want to see what congestion pricing does in the long term. You have just a little bit of time, but curious to see if these things converge more quickly now, which is totally not related to the prompt, but just again, a really cool call out there, Michael.
Yeah, and Michael, if you're listening, they update the data set like every day. So if you maybe after the new year, when you're on break, you want to download it really quickly and take another look. I'm sure we'd all be interested. I mean, it's essentially the same visual that you shared, Chris, right, from Kaiwei. What I appreciate about this one is that it also adds the context of volume, because we had those figures as well. They chose to focus on like percent recovery so that they had that common 100% baseline. But I think it was missing from Kaiwei saying, I mean, yes, like access to ride and I think bridges and tunnels have recovered, but now we can see that that barely represents any traffic whatsoever. So I like that even though we're focusing on the percentages in the chart, we still have the context of like where most of the ridership actually comes from. As far as the interactivity piece, like you mentioned, Lauren, I think I slightly prefer the filtering that Kaiwei had so that we can look at the weekday. I think the timeline is cool. Like it's cool to like see it. I think it's a little bit more novel than it is practical, especially since I'm not sure how long it takes to actually see the whole thing. But yeah, one thing I will say about the KPIs part of Slab, I still don't fully understand what they represent, to be perfectly honest. Is it like I don't know if it's the recovery from the last 3 months exactly, and then the line, like the arrow is compared to the previous 3 months. I think that might be exactly it, but I had a hard time like understanding exactly what it meant. But yeah, this is a great one.
All right, I'll be going over Sajjad's submission, and I just wanted to start by pointing out that this is a Python project, and reading his LinkedIn post, he's actually a Power BI developer, and he just learned Plotly and Dash in the past month to do this project, which is really impressive. So I want to start with that. And then if you go to the About This Project section, he includes 2 links, one to his GitHub repository and one to the actual app that he created. So I'm going to start with the GitHub repository. So for those of you not familiar with GitHub, it's a place where people upload their code to share with everyone else. And it's really common for Python code. And this is a really well organized GitHub repo. You can see down here in his README, he's talking about all the features of the app that he created. You can see this interactive sidebar, the Plotly visualizations, and the responsive design. And then he very clearly states his technology stack as well. So Dash was used to basically create this app. Plotly is used to create the highlighting and the visualizations. Bootstrap is a way that you can stylize your web page. And then this is in Python, this is the data. So it's just really well organized for everything that's in here. And most of the code is in this .py file here. And if I click on this, you can see it's pretty complex. There is a lot going on here. I just wanted to show the scope of that. But in addition, he created this mockup folder as well that I want to highlight. So in here, there's a PNG file of just what he wanted this to look like before he even got into it. And I love this for Python because with Python code, you can spend a lot of time in the code. So it's good to have this final idea in mind and then work towards that. Okay. So I love this GitHub repo. I'm going to stop gushing over it. I'm going to move on to his actual app. All right. So this is his app with the dashboard. And you can see here first, it's beautiful. And that's because of Bootstrap. And then over here, this highlighting is because of Plotly. And you can see this is the main visual that we've seen a few times already. But what I like about this submission is that it breaks it down in a lot of different ways. We've talked about like what should we break it down by weekday or weekend? Should we break it down by month or week? And you can see everything is broken down here. And then on the left, we have all these filters. So right now it's filtered on subways, but then you can change that to be filtered on buses. And it's really nice. Everything updates dynamically. You can pick a particular year to look at, like just 2020 versus all the other years. This one allows you to look at days that are above a particular recovery amount. And then this one, you can see these are weekly stats versus monthly. So these highlights are all really nice. I would say I really like this dashboard because it allows you to interact with it on your own and discover insights. My one bit of feedback is just this recovery term. For a while, I wasn't specifically sure what that recovery referred to, but then as I dug into it, I saw that it's comparing to pre-pandemic values. But otherwise, yeah, I thought this was a really clean dashboard and it allows the user to explore as much as they like.
Yeah, I really like the use of Bootstrap here. Bootstrap is an amazing way to make Plotly dashboards really, really pretty. And I think that, I think the organization here is lovely. And this is a case where I'm not sure all of the bar charts necessarily add too much to the story, but overall, I think, this is really well done, especially for somebody who just learned this in a month. That's pretty darn impressive. And I also appreciate the impeccable GitHub repo as well.
I was gonna say that as I was going through the deck, and I tend to lean towards the big single visual that sort of captures most of the story. I sort of discarded this more traditional dashboard style, but this one is really good because the interactivity is all on the left side, right? And then everything else just up. You don't have to dig too much through the majority of this, right? So you just set up your filters on the left hand side, and everything just works, which is amazing. Probably to Chris's point could have lived without some of these bar charts, but then again, like if nothing else, like they do share some of the data that is presented, right? And very, very well done.
Yeah, if anything, maybe it's like a selector to pick your cut if you wanted to dig into that. But yeah.
One question I had, Alice, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, is there a way to compare two services? So like if I wanted to look at buses and subways, is there a way to multi-select, or is that like I do not know Plotly or Bootstrap or any of these things. So I was just curious because it would be pretty cool to see like both of those lines highlighted to kind of reflect, okay, well, comparatively, I don't have to do the mental work of, okay, I remember that the bus line was the one that went down for a long time, so it would be cool to be able to do that. But I totally agree. Really, really cool project, especially given the fact that he is a Power BI developer and was able to do all of this. So really impressive job here.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the multi-select. I just see one here, but then you can reference like this.
Okay.
If you want, you can. It's a different object, so it's similar to like Power BI. Like you have to explicitly select a multi-select option, and it looks like here he just chose a single option. But the tool itself has options for implementing a multi-select, but this one does not have that implemented.
Got it.
Yeah, I think just I feel like he had an idea of what he wanted to do in his mind, like what he would have done in Power BI, and then the execution in Plotly from just having learned it is pretty unbelievable. If you ask me, like I think this is one of the first dashboards that just caught my eye. Like I think I just need to open this and play around with it. And I love that I hadn't looked at his GitHub repo, Alice. I love that he actually like wireframed it in Power BI. That's pretty cool, especially since normally you'd have sometimes I do things in Excel. I know Chris likes to do like wireframing by hand and then do it in Power BI. So it was cool to see him use Power BI as the intermediate step because he's a Power BI developer. I'm curious to see how he feels now, comparing both, and see which one he's more comfortable. I mean, I'm sure he's more comfortable with Power BI, but I feel like he might have been pleasantly surprised as to how intuitive Plotly and Dash can be. I do think that as far as executing on the challenge prompt, I'm leaning towards the previous two entries a little bit more over this one. I will say, and because of all the charts, like you guys mentioned, like I feel like there was an opportunity to maybe include some of those volume metrics in here for context as well. That's what at first I expected the bar chart to be, and then I noticed it was average recovery, which I think you can gauge from the line chart as well. If this is your first Dash project, this is unbelievable, and you should be very proud.
So I'm going to talk about Stefano's entry. Stefano, I think, certainly doesn't need any introductions. He's a common name in our challenges. He's a common name in these finalist calls, and he's been missing for the last couple of challenges, and it is great to see his entry once again in the deck. So as we know, Stefano has a specific style of doing these entries, and this entry isn't an exception. So he always has a really well-developed about section where he will guide you through the whys, why he did what he did and what influenced his decision. Actually, there is a piece here in the end where he explained the theme, the color theme, and the color palette, where he got those from their actually official NTA branding colors and styles. And another very common thing that you will see in his write-ups is they tend to be very technical, right? There is a lot of code here for people who may want to recreate some of this stuff. You can see there is a bunch of M code for Power Query. Below you will see some DAX and whatnot, but let's skip all of that for now. I actually opened his dashboard in another window, and again, like a lot of what he does, it's sort of like an app style project. When we were releasing this challenge, this is something that I was sort of envisioning as what might be a good way to approach. To Chris's earlier point, there are different ways to approach the challenge prompt, but I was always leaning towards the one or two big impactful visuals where you can tell a lot of, where you can share a lot of detail. Stefano chose scatter plot, or rather a bubble chart, if you will. He plots the change versus the pre-pandemic level on the Y, and then the absolute volume of ridership on the X-axis. And this is another live axis. So you can actually play this and see how these changes happen over time. This is very cool. It's a very, very modern thing to do. I tend to see a lot of these on LinkedIn and places like Visual Capitalist and whatnot. Very cool. The size of the bubble is actually the volume of ridership, and we can see this evolve over time. I can actually pause this, and if I want to navigate to a specific point in time to see what was happening, then I can. There are also some cool tooltips here which allow for extra context. Overall, just a whole lot of information packed into a single visual. Another thing that I appreciate, and not a lot of people did this, one of our other finalists also did. I love the fact that this sort of index here starts at 0. So what you have seen before is a lot of people went and the chart started at 0, and then they would go to 100%, which would be a reference line, and then if a certain mode of transport went over, so recovered more than a pre-pandemic level, they would be at 120%, 105, 100, some numbers like this. Isn't necessarily wrong, but I like this approach better. It's like you have an index here, which is the pandemic year or whatever time frame you choose, right? And then you compare to that ground zero what was happening in this period after that. I find it a little bit more intuitive. Definitely love what Stefano did here with that. I'm going to let this play because it's just so cool. It's not the only chart he shared. He added this area chart, which is a definition of cleanliness, if you ask me. So there is absolutely nothing extra here. It's basically the estimation of figures based on what was happening before the pandemic, and then the actual, this dark blue piece, which shows the actuals in the years that follow. And you can select, you can select a single mode of transport, and you can sort of toggle between weekends and weekdays. This sort of answers the interactivity piece of our challenge prompt. And the only thing that sort of bugged me was this. I've said already, I wasn't all too sold on this weekdays weekends breakdown. And as I was looking at his, we have the same slicer here, but for example, it doesn't make a lot of, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense on a visual that's live, right? Because we don't have something like a line chart where we can see all the data points at once, right? We have to watch this thing over and over and over again to compare what was happening when. And so having this slicer in this visual, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense, for example, on this area chart, where you can immediately, see the change that is caused by this time frame. But overall, like, just another very strong entry from Stefano. Definitely happy to have him back in our challenges, and hope he continues to participate.
This was great. I took a lot of time with Stefano's too, just kind of looking in and just really interested in what he had to do. One piece of feedback that I had, and I don't know if it's just the way my brain works maybe, but the timeline being right on the same axis as the monthly ridership level. I understand what he's doing, but it confuses me a little bit, this particular kind of like visual where I'm seeing them go, like forward and then back and then, up and then down. So like I don't know what the answer to that is, but having the timeline on that same axis is a little bit challenging for my brain to kind of compute. Having said that, it is still just a really, really clever visual. And I think it's one that we haven't seen from anybody just yet. So I think it's a really great way to show this.
Yeah, totally agreed. I don't know. I think actually this is a native Power BI visual, although don't take my word for it. I haven't actually ever played with these live axes. It may have been important. I don't know. I just chose to focus on the date call out here. To your point, it would be awesome if we could just lose this bit here with the sort of, I don't know if that's even an option. Again, I haven't played with this stuff. I don't know if it's possible to just like white this stuff out and just make it invisible somehow, MacGyver it as it was, and just focus on the big date call out here. But yeah, definitely a valid point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was natural since we had two numeric values per date, right? One was percent recover, the other one was absolute ridership, to just put them in a scatter plot and see how it trends over time with this timeline. And while I appreciate the animation, and I think this is the exact use case for it, I still kind of struggle to like learn from it as I'm watching it. Like I feel like I don't get as much insight from it as I am just watching a static line chart. Granted, this is two things that I'm learning, right? Volume plus recovery, but I think maybe just two line charts. I don't know. It's just, I feel like I expect to learn more from it because it's exactly what you're supposed to do with this kind of chart, and maybe it's just not for me. Or maybe I just don't compute as well. Learn. I like the ridership trends over time. We haven't seen that in any of the other finalists. It shows the absolute volume. And it also shows how, I might be understanding this wrong, but how accurate their models were for calculating what their estimate would have been for ridership at that time, because you can see the same patterns across time. Because it's easy to think that since we're just saying, pre-pandemic level, let's set the 100% baseline, that maybe that value is set at, the ridership volume on the date that the pandemic started. But really, they're using these models to calculate what the expected volume would have been, and that's what they're comparing to. And it's you can see that in the ridership trends over time. You can't see that if you're just looking at this line chart that we've seen in all the other ones, right? That gray chart. So I just think that's interesting. But, yeah. Okay. I will start by saying, and I guess I say this all the time, but the more that time that I've spent with this one, the more I love it. It's pretty simple. We have the same visual right off the bat that we've seen in other ones. So it's just a single area chart that shows the weekly ridership trends. This one is rolled up. So you'll see that this is the default view is to see all services. But we actually have two targets here. So normally we'd have either the 100% or the 0 baseline bonus lab, like you mentioned. But I like that they added the 80% target line as well. And those are actually going to stay consistent with these little KPI sort of indicators that they added to the right, where if over the last 52 weeks, I think it is, over the last year, which would be, I guess, somewhere around here. I do wish we had that line here as a visual indicator as well. But if over the last year, over half of the weeks have been at least 80% recovery, then you get this little orange indicator, like at weekends. If over half have been over green, then we get this green indicator. I think that's smart. And especially because, again, we wanted this to be interactive. And I think these indicators sort of guide your interactivity. It brought us up. I know you were mentioning like, oh, yes, I have this weekday like lighter, and I can click and see the differences, but like, why does that matter? And I think here, like just looking at it here, all right, so it looks like weekend has the one that has had the best recovery overall, right? So now I'm immediately prompted to let's just click on weekends. And yeah, you see that again. I wish I had the reference line for the past 52 weeks, like where they start, but you can see that even before then, like we were kind of hitting that 80% marker early on. And it kind of, I love the sort of guided interactivity it brings without being very in your face. The other thing that you can do here is just filter services. So right now we have all of them. Let's say we go to subways. And again, as we do that, these will all update. So maybe we want to go to weekends here as well. Keep clicking. Buses all red. Long Island Rail. All right. So overall we're orange. Weekend we're in green. So let's take a look at that. And now we can like see that recovery over here. So I thought that was a really smart way of like showing me where to look to kind of try to tease out the insights. You'll see that they've got insights here as well. These are just, I think they're not even just general. You'll see that this is filtered to weekend in Long Island Rail. Let me just go back to all services. You'll see that it updates. So that's pretty neat. Got some more about the service and how the data was collected. This all came from the source. But I think it's cool to build this into a Dash app. It makes it seem very polished, in my opinion. The other thing you can do right now, we're just seeing the overall percentages in the same line chart. We can actually show the view that Stefano is showing in terms of volume. Same type. You've got the pre-pandemic as an area in the back, post-pandemic actual numbers in the front. And what Marianne did was actually added a trend line as well using linear regression. The cool thing is that you'll notice that it doesn't start from the beginning, which I think was smart. If we go back to the write-up, you'll see that it says that it actually starts. So the data used for the forecast excludes recovery up until, so everything before November 2021, which represents the period of lockdown, vaccination is first recovery. So once things technically were allowed to come back to normal, that's when she started using the data for the forecast, which is smart. And what that does is let her calculate, all right, in 1 year past this point, where are we expected to be? And you'll see that in 2 years, it looks like overall for all services, we're expected to at least half the time be over 80%, which I think is pretty neat. And again, you can do the same thing for here. Subway, because it's the bulk of the volume, has a very similar trend. Buses, you can see the trend line is even a little bit negative. So that's kind of have a hard time recovering to pre-pandemic levels. And again, as we continue to ride, right, it looks like Long Island Rail in 2 years will be fully recovered across the board, et cetera, right? We can go to weekends here and see that trend. It's interesting that they kept the y-axis fixed. I think that's a good way of showing the relative differences in volume between services. I think I'm right. Yeah. Oh, actually, it's not fixed. That's my mistake. I think it's fixed based on, if I go to Long Island Rail, it'll keep based on weekday and weekends, which again just shows that there's much less volume on weekends than on weekdays. But yeah, I don't know. I think this was a really smart approach of still using one visual, like cleverly using the indicators to guide the interactivity and to also like answer the question, like, okay, this is how far we've recovered right now. But if we look out into the future a little bit, like when can we expect to be back, if at all? So yeah, I really like this one. I think it captured the spirit of the challenge. I'm a sucker for a dark theme as well, and it was cool to see this all done in Plotly, which I believe is Marianne's first, at least Plotly, like Dash app that's been published, because I know she was looking at some of the tutorials from the Plotly folks that we collaborated with, which was nice to see.
Yeah, it's a really, really nice app. I was curious. I'm trying to dig through the source code right now to see how where the insights and suggestions are pulled from, because I think that's really cool that that's dynamic. I was like, now that we're in the world of LLMs, I'm like, is this like auto-generated insight? But I'm guessing it's like pulling. She probably spent the time to jot down her thoughts on each one of them and get them in there. But still, really nice level of detail, beautiful visualization, and I like that on the main visual. Like if we go back. I just like that she gives us the option to do percentages versus volume. Like I know in some cases they tried to marry both of those metrics or like just give us one. And for the most part, if I had to pick, I'd pick percentages because that tells me like, the relative measure. But it is still nice to have that volume because I mean, one, there's a lot of people on transit in New York. You start to potentially estimate things like financial shortfalls or whatever, but it's just a really, really, really good app. And if this is the first one, at least that she's deployed, I mean, this is really well done. I like the conversation about some of the, I've seen this from a few folks, but when you go to deploy an app on an environment that isn't your local environment, there are challenges, and that's always the it's always you get a couple battle scars that make you stronger in the long run, but that's always a hard thing to do. So I really liked that conversation there too.
Yeah.
But yeah, really well done.
Maybe I missed this. Did anybody else kind of forecast into the future and look at what ridership looks like in the next year or 2 years?
Not in the finalists. There were some folks. I think there's a few honorable mentions that had some forecasts in there.
Because
yeah,
I feel like that, not only is this like answering the question, but it's actually also like giving us even more information, which I think is just this is really impressive. I mean, everybody who uses Plotly is kind of making me want to try it out. So, Chris, you might be getting some Slack messages from me about this in the near future. But this one in particular just feels really, really cohesive. I love all of the information that you're getting. And I really like the fact that we're kind of looking, okay, well, in 2 years, Long Island Railroad is going to be back to normal, if not above. I think that's just a really, really cool additional kind of piece of information to include here.
I don't even remember that people sort of forecasted. I remember this entry stuck around somewhere in my brain because of that fact. There was one other person who plotted the number of COVID cases. I think it was also a unique sort of idea among the 100-something, I don't remember, entries. But yeah, this is an amazing. I don't like Enrique dark themes, but I still like this app.
I think there might have been like a light theme in development somewhere that they mentioned, like, sorry, you'll have to stick with the dark for now. I might be wrong, and it was someone else. Yeah, I appreciated it.
I'll say for me, the part that stuck out the most is just that right portion where you get to dig into that main visual more, but then the visual is different based on how you're filtering the data. So you have the indicators in some cases, and then that heat chart in some other cases. And so I feel like that's a great way to showcase what Plotly can do, or Dash can do with this app, because then you're able to. I'm not as familiar with Power BI, but I feel like I typically see like a visualization, and that visualization will update, but there's not as much movement as you see here with like opening up the insights, updating that top right piece. So yeah, I feel like this is just a great app that showcases what you can do beyond like a Power BI or a Tableau.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially, and we were talking about the forecasts, right? And I think folks that they just use the native, like, right, I have a line chart in Power BI, it lets me forecast out more periods, right? But I would assume that includes all the data in the chart for the forecast, where this one I think cleverly didn't, because why would I use these outlier periods, right, to forecast out? Let's start like when technically things could have started to come back to normal, which is again an advantage that this brings over. That's a good point. Yeah, I don't think you could, unless you were very clever with like, moving things in front of the other one in Power BI, like use the same real estate for different visuals.
Exactly, you would have to have a bunch of, I think, bookmarks or just objects placed on top of one another, and then play with the layers, which would then, of course, affect other things. But this is amazing. Out of the box now, and to your point, Enrique, also, I don't think that in Power BI you can choose to exclude a certain number of periods from a forecast line. Just don't remember if you can do so from the beginning. I think it only works from the left side, but again, I would have to get reminded of that. I don't think the people did it though. They just usually leave it at a default, which is I think 95% past time periods or something. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all the finalists. I know we've already discussed them in length. So unless anyone kind of wants to add a little bit more of their opinion to see like which ones they feel covered the challenge prompt better than the rest, or maybe you all have a vote in mind. How's everyone feeling?
I know who I'm voting for.
Yeah,
Me too.
The only thing I'm torn between is the storytelling aspect of some of the early entries you saw. So like the kind of historical notes versus I think the one that we just saw. Because I think both like the context we get with some of these historical events that maybe changed the lines or shifted the lines is really nice, but the implementation of Marie's was really, really beautiful. So I'm struggling with that a little bit. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, what's the prompt again? What's the actual
So the task is to create an interactive visual or dashboard that illustrates post-pandemic ridership recovery trends across the MTA services.
That doesn't help me at all.
I think I need to start writing better prompts.
I stopped thinking just because I'm going to go down the rabbit hole, so I know who I'm going to.
No, it's more like thinking about Chris's point here. Like, if it were just, looking at post-recovery ridership over time, like maybe that would sway me. But like thinking about the trends, okay, well, what do the trends mean, and what's behind the trend? That's kind of now like, well, darn, that I could still go either way. So I rescind I'm ready.
So you're not ready.
I am not. Well, I will. I can get ready, but
yeah.
I was really confident until Chris said something.
I know.
So
yeah. We'll see. Maybe we'll have a time. We'll have to struggle through this, but at least I can just present this. We can get rid of this because we already should have it pulled up. Okay. So if you want, just click on the person you're voting for. We won't submit yet, and then I'll count us down. 1, 2, 3. There we go. All right. Well, congratulations, Michael. Let's give him a round of applause.
It was truly, those were the two that I was deciding between. And it was really the, being able to see exactly the reason behind some of these dips and rises and all of that pushed me one way. But Marie Ann was like incredible too.
I agree.
Yeah, it ultimately like there was just that enough ambiguity. Like I ended up going with Marie because I was thinking like if I was using this on the regular basis, I'd probably have the context. But from a storytelling perspective, Michael's was amazing. But both really well deserved and great entries here.
Yeah. All right, Michael. I think this is your second time winning this year, so you know the drill. But congratulations once again. You get a free annual membership to Maven Analytics. If you already took the first one for yourself, you could give this one away. You get another custom challenge winner t-shirt, maybe get a different color this time around, or message us. We'll see what we can do, but congratulations. Yeah, let's give another round of applause. All right, that's it for this challenge. Thanks again to everyone who continues to participate. And if you're interested in joining the next one, make sure to follow Maven Analytics on LinkedIn, and I'll hope to see you there.